The condo listing hadn't gone anywhere. It was still up on my laptop, 2 more tabs lined up behind it, a 1-bedroom off 11 Mile. A place farther south that nobody seemed to want, when my mother's name came across the screen. I folded the laptop halfway shut and answered. That was how most Sundays went. She opened with my father. Lyle had burned the first half of his morning hunting for a Phillips head screwdriver in the garage. He went through every drawer in the workbench, checked the ledge above the door, even walked out to the glove box of his truck, only to find the thing hanging on the pegboard, not 6 inches from where she had pointed him in the first place. She delivered the story the way she always delivered stories like that. Every detail set up so you knew she had been right all along, and that she was simply choosing to be gracious about it now. I walked the phone to the kitchen and pulled open the refrigerator. Everything I had picked up at the Royal Oak Farmers Market the day before was still arranged across 2 shelves. I grabbed the Brussels sprouts, then opened the freezer for a bag of cheese ravioli. The carrots were meant for the week ahead. The eggs were for morning. On Sunday nights I wanted food that didn't require much from me. I ran water into a pot, set it on the burner, and turned the heat all the way up. I cut the sprouts in half, laid them out on a sheet pan with olive oil and salt, and pushed the pan into the oven. Then I went back to the refrigerator for the jar of marinara I had cracked open a few days earlier. My mother had moved on to Calder's kids. Arlo, who was 3, had entered a stretch of asking why about nearly everything. Why the bathwater went cold, why the moon showed up during the day, why the dog couldn't sit at the table. Opal, too, had started peeling off her socks and leaving them in odd corners of the house, which meant Margot spent a portion of every evening following the baby's trail back through rooms she had just finished cleaning. Through my kitchen window, the shop signs and headlights along the street had already come on, though the hour wasn't late. That was November in Michigan. It pulled the daylight away early, without giving you much notice. The apartment heat cycled on again, humming low and steady. I set a smaller pot on the burner and spooned the marinara in. My mother said Calder and Margot were having trouble with the kitchen renovation. I knew about the renovation. They planned it for over a year, set money aside, ordered the cabinetry. The budget had a contingency. But after demolition, the contractor opened a section of wall and found electrical wiring that had to be brought up to code and old galvanized plumbing that couldn't stay behind new drywall. Calder and Margot could cover the code-required work. What they couldn't cover anymore was everything else: the countertop they'd picked, the lighting package, the cabinet hardware, a few appliance upgrades, and the smaller cosmetic things that hadn't been ordered yet. I dropped the ravioli into the boiling water and told her that if the overage was only on the electrical and plumbing side, they should reduce the scope on everything else and finish with what they had. My mother said they could do that, but the cabinetry was already ordered. The kitchen was torn open down to the studs, and 2 small children were living around a construction zone. She said it the way she said most things when she wanted you to feel the full weight of someone else's situation before you finished your own sentence. I asked how much they were short to keep the original plan more or less intact. About $18,000, she said. I stopped stirring. I told her that was a serious number, that $18,000 wasn't something you just moved around without thinking hard about what it came out of. I reached into the refrigerator for the apple cider. My mother was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then she asked whether I could lend Calder the money. My hand was already on the bottle. I set it back on the shelf and closed the refrigerator door. I told her I couldn't do that. That money had been sitting in my account for a reason, and the reason hadn't changed. She asked if I wanted to think about it overnight. I said I had been saving for a condo for years, and she knew that. I wasn't in a position to move that kind of money somewhere else and still be where I needed to be when the right place came up. She said I hadn't bought one yet. I didn't have a closing date. The money was sitting in an account doing nothing in the meantime. I said it wasn't doing nothing just because I hadn't spent it yet. That was the whole point of saving. You set it aside. You don't touch it. And when the right thing comes along, it's there. She said she understood that, but Calder needed help now, not in theory. I asked why she and my father didn't lend it to him, if the timing was what mattered. She said they didn't have $18,000 in available cash. I was the one with savings. I told her that having savings didn't make me the family's backup account. I'd been putting money away on a procurement salary in Troy for years. Not because it was easy, but because I'd been careful about it. And I wasn't going to undo that for a kitchen renovation, even Calder's. She didn't push further. She told me not to make a decision while I was irritated about being asked and to sleep on it. Her voice had that particular steadiness she used when she wanted you to know she was being the reasonable one, even if you weren't. Then the call drifted back to where it usually lived. She asked what time my flight got in on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Lyle would drive down to Sawyer to pick me up, same as every time. Before we hung up, she asked what I was having for dinner. Frozen cheese ravioli and roasted Brussels sprouts, I told her. Better than it sounds. At least it's not cereal, she said. We told each other we loved each other, and the call ended. I went back to the stove. The ravioli had floated to the surface of the water and were bumping gently against one another. I lifted them out with a slotted spoon, spooned the marinara over the top, pulled the sheet pan of sprouts from the oven, and carried everything to the small table by the living room window. It was fully dark outside now. My reflection sat faintly in the glass, a woman eating dinner alone at a table with a laptop open beside her plate. The condo listing was still on the screen. For years, whenever a family plan needed someone to be a little more flexible, I was usually the one who adjusted. A flight that had to be changed, I changed mine. A group gift that came up short by $40 or $60, I covered the difference and never brought it up again. I lived alone, I had no children, and I generally had less to rearrange than Calder, who had a wife and 2 kids and a house that needed things fixed in it. Those adjustments were small enough that the cost of arguing about them was usually higher than the cost of just taking care of them. $18,000 was not that kind of adjustment. Not long after, Lyle called. My father said he wasn't calling to tell me I should give Calder $18,000. He just hoped the 2 of us could find some way to keep the money question from sitting in the middle of the table when Thanksgiving came around. I told him I didn't want it there either, but I wasn't sure what he expected me to do. Calder needed a number I didn't have to give, and I'd already told Mom that. He said he didn't know what the right answer was. He just didn't want everybody walking into the holiday already carrying something against each other. I told him I wasn't carrying anything against anyone. I just couldn't write a check for $18,000 and pretend it didn't come out of somewhere. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a while. The ravioli had gone cold. The marinara had thickened around the edges of the plate. Outside, a car pulled into the lot behind the building, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling in a slow arc before going dark. I picked up my fork and ate. 2 days later, my mother called again. She said Calder was about to finalize a revised budget with the contractor and needed to know soon which items they were keeping and which ones they were cutting. That same afternoon, Calder texted me. His message said the contractor needed the final list so they could confirm the remaining material orders and lock in the schedule. He asked if I could lend him a little to help close the gap. He didn't say $18,000. He just said a little. I read the message a few times. It reminded me of something from a few years back. Calder had a car repair bill come in at the same time as a few other expenses, and the timing was bad enough that he asked if I could help him out. I sent him $900. He paid it back over 3 or 4 transfers across the next couple of months, and after the last one, neither of us mentioned it again. I opened my banking app and sat with it for a while. Then I sent Calder $4,000. In the message, I told him that was everything I was going to lend him. Not a first installment, the whole amount. He thanked me and said he'd pay it back once the renovation was past the most expensive stretch. I didn't ask for a specific date. I told my mother I had sent Calder $4,000 and that I wouldn't be sending more. She said she was glad I'd decided to help, and that it was better than nothing, but it would have been better if I could have done the full amount. She said it all in one breath, the way you do when you want to acknowledge something and correct it at the same time. The following Wednesday, a new listing appeared in my saved search. 1-bedroom condo near downtown Royal Oak, listed at $312,000. I opened it that evening on my laptop. It was a corner unit at the end of the corridor. In-unit washer and dryer, 1 assigned parking spot in the building's garage. The monthly HOA fell within the range I'd been using in my calculations for the past year. The listing photos didn't make it look special. Beige walls, standard fixtures, a kitchen that clearly hadn't been touched in a while, but the layout was different from the other places I'd been watching. I scheduled a showing for Saturday morning. When the agent unlocked the door and I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. The unit sat far from the elevator, and once the door closed behind us, the hallway noise dropped away almost entirely. The living room had high ceilings and tall windows that looked out over rooftops, a few parking lots, and the back sides of the buildings along the downtown blocks. The view wasn't something you'd put in a listing photo, but the room got a lot of light, even on a gray November morning. and the light came in from two directions because of the corner position. A square concrete column stood slightly off-center in the room. The layout wasn't perfect because of it, but I saw immediately what I could do. If the sofa went along the wall to the left of the windows, the space behind the column was just wide enough for a desk and a chair. The desk I had now was wedged into the corner of my bedroom in the apartment I was renting, between the closet door and the radiator, and every time I needed to open the closet, I had to push the chair out of the way first. I walked to the space behind the column and stood there, looking from the wall to the window, measuring it with my eyes. The agent had already moved on toward the bedroom. By the time she realized I wasn't behind her, she had to come back and find me still standing in the same spot. The kitchen had the kind of details you'd expect from the early 2000s. Oak-toned cabinets with a slightly orange cast, laminate countertop with a few marks from years of use. Basic white appliances that were clean but not new. The bathroom was similar, functional, nothing updated, nothing broken. The floors throughout were a dark engineered hardwood that someone had taken care of. There was a narrow window beside the kitchen sink that looked down over a service alley and the flat roofs of the buildings behind. I stood at the sink for a moment and pictured the Saturday mornings, coming back from the farmer's market with bags of apples and eggs and whatever else was good that week, setting them on this counter instead of trying to fit them into the small galley kitchen of my current apartment. The bedroom wasn't large, but it had a walk-in closet with actual depth to it, no balcony, no particular view. But there was nothing in the entire unit that I looked at and thought I'd need to fix before moving in. Before I left, I went back to the living room one more time. The concrete column was still there, plain and slightly awkward, dividing the room in a way the architect probably hadn't intended. The space behind it was still just right for a desk. I wanted to buy this place. After the showing, my agent told me the listing agent had mentioned other interested buyers. The seller hadn't set a formal offer deadline, but the unit was well priced for the area and had only been on the market since Wednesday. She said we shouldn't assume it would still be available after Thanksgiving. If I wanted to move, she could have an offer ready for me to sign that evening. I told her I needed to think. At home, I opened the worksheet for my lender. I had pre-approval and I knew the financing structure I was working toward. At a purchase price around $32,000 with 15% down, the total I'd need at closing was approximately $58,500, assuming the numbers didn't shift much from there. Before I lent Calder the money, I'd had about $64,000 in savings. After the $4,000, I had about $60,000. If I bought this condo, nearly everything I'd saved over the past several years would go into the transaction. On the numbers I had today, I'd be committing almost every dollar of my liquid savings to the purchase. A moving expense, a car repair, an unexpected bill, any of those would probably end up on a credit card for a while, but the math worked. I could still buy. If I sent Calder another $14,000, I'd be down to $46,000, and I would not have enough to bring this deal to closing under the financing plan I had in place. Saturday evening, my agent texted asking if I wanted to start the paperwork. I looked at the message I'd sent my mother a few days earlier. $4,000 is all of it. I told the agent I needed a little more time. What I didn't tell her was that I was waiting for my mother to call on Sunday the way she always did. I didn't need her permission to buy a condo. I knew that. But knowing that and feeling settled about it were not the same thing. For most of my adult life, home had still meant Marquette at Thanksgiving and Christmas, Sunday calls with my mother, my father driving down to Sawyer to pick me up whenever I flew home. What I wanted from Sunday wasn't permission. I wanted to hear that my mother could accept where I'd stopped. If she called and talked about the usual things, the weather, the kids, something Lyle had or hadn't fixed, and never mentioned Calder's kitchen, then I'd know the $4,000 had been enough. The ask had ended where I said it would end. Then I could call my agent and say yes, without feeling as though I were putting nearly everything I had into a home for myself, while my family was still hoping I might give more. Sunday morning I cleaned the apartment, I wiped down the kitchen counter, swept the floor, organized a drawer I'd been meaning to get to for weeks. I kept the phone on the counter where I could see it. By noon my mother hadn't called. That wasn't unusual. She usually called in the afternoon, sometimes not until early evening. But I was aware of the phone in a way I normally wasn't. I'd walk past the counter and glance at the screen. I'd pick it up, check for a missed call, set it back down. I made a sandwich for lunch and ate it standing at the counter, looking at the phone the way you look at a door you're not sure someone is going to walk through. The agent's listing page was still open on my laptop. I closed it, then opened it again 20 minutes later. The condo was still listed as active. Someone else could be scheduling a showing right now, could be walking through that living room, standing in the space behind the column, seeing the same thing I saw. I wanted to call my mother. I wanted her to pick up and talk about nothing, about Arlo's new word, about whatever Lyle was doing in the garage, and never mention Calder's kitchen at all. If she could do that, if she could let the 4,000 be the end of it, then I could call my agent back and say yes. But if I called her and she brought it up again, I'd have my answer too, and it wasn't the one I wanted. I opened her contact. I looked at her name on the screen for a while. I closed it. Mid-afternoon, I tried to read. I got through 2 pages of something and realized I hadn't absorbed a single sentence. My stomach had been tight since morning. The kind of tightness that wasn't hunger, but sat in the same place. I put the book down and went to the window. The street below was quiet, the way Royal Oak got on Sunday afternoons in November when the weather kept people indoors. The agent texted again around 4. The paperwork could be ready whenever I was. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and told myself I'd decide by evening. Evening came. I didn't decide. The apartment got dark and I turned on the lamp by the sofa and sat there, not reading, not watching anything, just sitting with the phone on the counter behind me where I couldn't see the screen. My mother didn't call. The heavy feeling followed me to bed. I lay there going over the same calculation I'd already done 3 times, 60,000 minus 58.5. The thin margin left over, the months it would take to rebuild any cushion at all. The numbers were fine. The numbers had been fine since Saturday. What wasn't fine was everything around the numbers. I fell asleep eventually and woke up still carrying it. This morning, my agent sent a short message. The seller had received a written offer Sunday evening and had accepted it. The condo was under contract. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and stood there for a while. The apartment was quiet. Heat ticked through the radiator in the living room. Through the window above the sink, I could see the back of the building across the alley, its brick darkened from overnight rain. I thought about the column. The square gray column in the middle of the living room, and the space behind it where a desk would have fit without crowding anything. I thought about the narrow window by the kitchen sink and the light that came in from 2 sides. I thought about standing in that room and knowing, before the agent had even opened the bedroom door, that I could live there. I looked at my own kitchen. The counter barely wide enough for a cutting board. The cabinets I'd never bothered to rearrange because they weren't mine. Down the hall, through the open bedroom door, I could see the corner of my desk pressed between the closet and the radiator. The chair pushed sideways to make room for the door to open. I made coffee. I drank it standing at the counter. Then I got ready for work. That evening, I packed for Marquette. I set aside a cream turtleneck, dark jeans, and a pair of brown ankle boots for Wednesday, then zipped the suitcase and left it by the front door. I didn't tell anyone about the condo. There was nothing to tell. I had waited, and while I was waiting, it was gone. My father drove down to Sawyer to pick me up, the way he had every time I'd flown home since I moved downstate. Before leaving Marquette, he had checked the lake effect snowbands on the forecast and added extra time on M5553 to the airport, the way he always did, as though getting the drive wrong would be a failure of a kind he wasn't willing to accept. On the ride back, he asked about the flight, asked about work. He mentioned that my mother had started prep that morning, the brining, the cranberry sauce, the things that needed a day to settle. He didn't bring up the renovation. I didn't mention the condo. When the truck turned onto their street, the porch light and the kitchen window were already lit. I followed my father in through the door from the attached garage, the same entrance I'd used since I was a child. Just inside was the boot tray, a black plastic tray with shallow walls, holding a pair of his winter boots, and a pair of my mother's lined clogs. White salt stains had dried on the rubber mat beneath it. The air inside carried the smell it always carried in November. The furnace running warm and dry, the faint trace of whatever my mother had been cooking that day. And beneath it, something that was just the house itself, the carpet on the stairs, the wood paneling in the lower level. Years of the same detergent and the same soap and the same life lived inside the same walls. He set my suitcase down to pull off his boots, then carried it up the half flight of stairs to the main level. The split level hadn't changed much, though things had been swapped out gradually over the years. A new couch here, a different lamp there, the television now thinner and mounted where a framed print of Lake Superior used to hang. The kind of changes you stop noticing when you come home often enough. But the layout was the same. The living room flowing into the dining area, the kitchen to the right through a wide doorway, the hallway to the bedroom straight ahead. On the console table by the stairs, school pictures of Calder and me were still lined up in their frames alongside his wedding photo with Margot. And next to those, the children's pictures had gradually filled in the remaining space. First Arlo as an infant, then Opal. Then a family portrait from the previous Christmas. A crayon drawing of what appeared to be a dog, or possibly a horse, was held on the refrigerator door by a magnet from the hardware store downtown. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table in a gray sweatshirt and thick socks, a mug of tea near her hand. She stood up when I came in and hugged me and asked if the flight had been all right. I told her it was the usual fine. She asked whether I'd eaten. I said I'd had something at Detroit Metro. She said there was soup in the refrigerator if I changed my mind. I told her I was fine. She told me she put clean towels in the bathroom, asked if I brought warm enough layers, and then said Arlo had asked 3 times today whether Aunt Hollis was here yet. My father, hanging his coat by the door, said Opal would need about 10 minutes to warm up to me, and after that would probably follow me around all day. Nobody mentioned $18,000. My father carried my suitcase to the room at the end of the hall. It had been my bedroom when I lived here, but it didn't look like mine anymore. The twin bed was gone, replaced by a full-size bed with a navy quilt my mother had bought for guests. The old dresser was still there, though the top drawer now held rolls of wrapping paper and a stack of gift bags she kept for holidays. A few of my paperbacks still sat on the shelf by the window, spines faded and slightly warped from years of heat cycling. My mother had folded an extra blanket at the foot of the bed. On the nightstand was a phone charger he had bought after I forgot mine on a visit a few years back. He'd never moved it. He told me to sleep well and close the door. Later, when I went back to the kitchen for a glass of water, my mother was still sitting at the table. She asked how the job in Troy was going and whether I'd looked at any condos recently. I thought about the corner unit, the column in the living room, the listing that now said under contract. I told her I was still looking. She nodded and didn't press it. She said I should get to bed early. I slept quickly that night, but not well. The next morning, I found my father at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the newspaper open in front of him. An open bag of cinnamon Trenery toast sat beside the coffee maker. I poured myself a cup and took one. I dipped the end into the coffee. 2 seconds, my father said. I know. When I was little, he used to count for me because I always left it in too long. The softened end would break off and sink to the bottom of the mug, and he'd make me fish it out with a spoon before he'd give me another piece. I hadn't needed him to count in years. My hand still came out on 2. The cinnamon sugar had gone soft at the edge, coffee dark and warm, while the rest still cracked when I bit into it. My mother came into the kitchen a few minutes later and started checking her supplies for the stuffing. She picked up the jar of rubbed sage and frowned. It was nearly empty. I had plans to meet friends from high school. We'd set it up weeks ago, and my father said he'd drop me off on his way to the grocery store. On the drive, he only asked what time I'd be back that evening. I told him I'd probably be out through dinner. He said to text him if I needed a ride, then let me out at the coffee shop where the others were already waiting. I spent most of the day with them. We started late morning, ate together, and the group shifted through the afternoon as people came and went. By the time I took a cab back to the house, it was after dinner. My mother was putting the last of the Thanksgiving prep into the refrigerator. Early on Thanksgiving afternoon, Calder and Margot arrived with the children. Arlo ran to me at the door. Opal held on to Margot at first, pressing her face into her mother's shoulder, and didn't let me come close until a few minutes later when she decided I was safe. Margot asked about my flight and thanked me for the money I'd lent them. She said it simply and without any extra weight. The way you'd thank someone for a favor that had actually helped. Then the children pulled me down to the living room floor, and I didn't get up for a while. Arlo brought out a box of Duplo and told me to build a house. I stashed 2 stories, and Opal knocked it down immediately, laughing with her mouth wide open. I rebuilt it. She knocked it down again. After the 3rd time, I switched to building low towers that existed only for her to destroy, while Arlo selected the colored bricks and explained which ones were doors, which ones were windows, and which part was where the baby sleeps. A little later, Arlo brought a handful of toy cars, and we ran them along the edge of the coffee table like a road. Opal ignored every rule, pushing her car straight through the middle of everything and laughing when I pretended mine was stuck. Before dinner, I sat with both of them on the sofa and read a board book Arlo nearly knew by heart. He kept trying to say the last word on each page before I did. And when he beat me to it, he looked up at me as though he'd won something important. In the kitchen, my mother and Margot were working through the final stages. In the garage, my father had asked Calder to look at the snowblower, which had been making a sound he didn't like. Around 3 o'clock, the pace in the kitchen picked up. My mother opened the oven and my father stood beside her as they lifted the turkey out together, the heat rising in a rush that carried the smell of brown skin, butter, and black pepper. They set it on the counter to rest. My mother started the gravy while the sage stuffing and green bean casserole went into the oven to warm. The smell of sage gradually layered over the roast turkey scent that had already settled into the house. Outside, the late light had dropped low. Snow had been falling on and off most of the day, and the yard beyond the sliding glass door was already covered, the edges of my father's shoveled path beginning to soften again. The sky and the snow had both gone that blue-gray color late November afternoons get before dark. Inside, the house was warmer than it usually was. The oven had been running for hours. I picked up the Duplo and toy cars with the children when Margot said it was time to eat. In the kitchen, mashed potatoes were being finished, maple-glazed carrots moved to a serving bowl, dinner rolls pulled from a second rack in the oven. Calder started setting the table. He laid out water glasses and wine glasses, brought napkins and silverware from the drawer in the kitchen. Margot carried out the cranberry sauce and the side dishes, arranging them along the center of the table. After the turkey had rested long enough, my father carved. My mother poured gravy into the gravy boat she'd been using for as long as I could remember, white ceramic with a chip on the spout that had been part of the table for so long no one would have thought to replace it. The table filled gradually. Roast turkey, sage stuffing, Yukon Gold mashed potatoes, gravy, green bean casserole, maple-glazed carrots, cranberry sauce, and dinner rolls. The serving dishes didn't match. A few were from a set, a few were odds and ends picked up over the years, and at least 2 had been in that kitchen since before I was born. Calder took a bottle of Chateau Grand Traverse dry Riesling from the refrigerator, opened it at the counter, and brought it to the table along with a can of lemon-lime soda for me. Near 4 o'clock, my father called everyone to sit. Arlo remembered what I'd promised him earlier, and held the chair next to his, patting the seat with both hands until I sat down. Margot lifted Opal into the booster seat beside her. We started passing dishes. Through the window there was still a thin band of light at the edge of the sky. Inside, the children's voices cut through the adult conversation, and silverware clinked against the same plates my mother had been pulling out of the cabinet every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. My father started telling a story we'd all heard before. He said it was a Thanksgiving I was about 7 and Calder was about 10. My mother had made a pumpkin spice cake and spread a layer of vanilla whipped cream over the top, then put it in the refrigerator until dessert. She told both of us not to touch it. Sometime later, my father opened the refrigerator to get something and found a dip in the center of the whipped cream where someone had scooped a fingerful and then tried to smooth the surface back flat. He called us both over. Calder said it wasn't him. I said it wasn't me. My father looked at Calder for a long moment and then pointed at a small dot of whipped cream still sitting on the tip of his nose. I had been standing right next to him at the time holding a paper towel, because I had assigned myself the job of wiping the cream that had gotten on the rim of the cake pan. Calder, at the time, maintained that the whipped cream on his nose could have come from somewhere else. My father always finished the story by saying it was the first time he realized his son had a future as a lawyer. At the table now, Calder said Dad had been telling the story wrong for over 20 years. I said the only part he had wrong was making it sound like Calder acted alone. I was the one who came up with the idea of smoothing the cream back down. My mother laughed and said she'd seen the dip the moment she opened the refrigerator, but hadn't said anything. At dessert, she just set the whole cake on the table as though the surface had never been touched, and waited to see if the 2 of us would dare look at each other. My father picked up his wine glass. "It's good to have everybody home," he said. Everyone kept eating. The children made noise. Margot cut turkey into smaller pieces for Opal. The Riesling went around the table again. After dessert, Opal started rubbing her eyes and Margot carried her to the back bedroom to lie down. Arlo followed, dragging a board book and asking his mother for one more story. Margot came back a few minutes later and started clearing plates. I got up to help. The table was half done when my mother brought up the kitchen. She mentioned that the electrical work had been taken care of and that there were still some final selections to lock in before the contractor could finish. Then she turned toward Margot. "After what Hollis already sent," she said, "she'll cover the rest so you and Calder don't have to drop anything from the original plan." I looked at my mother. Then I looked at Calder. Calder didn't say anything. I asked my mother what she was talking about. She said she thought it had already been settled, that I had agreed to help Calder. I told her I'd agreed to $4,000 and I'd sent it last week. She said she didn't understand why I would stop there if Calder still had to cut nearly everything they planned. She asked why I was turning a simple thing between siblings into a negotiation about money at Thanksgiving dinner. "I'm not the one who brought money to this table, Mom," I said. My father looked across the table and asked Calder something about the snowblower, whether the noise had gotten worse, in a voice that made it clear he was trying to dissolve whatever was forming in the air between my mother and me. My mother didn't take it back. She took a small sip of her wine and said nothing. I was standing by the table with the chipped gravy boat still in my hand, something rising in my chest that I held down. I didn't tell them that a few days ago I'd still had a chance to make an offer on a condo I wanted badly enough to stand in its empty living room, measuring a space behind a concrete column with my eyes. I didn't say that the $4,000 I'd already given had thinned my margin to almost nothing, or that the reason I hadn't signed the paperwork in time was that I'd been waiting for a phone call from my mother that never came. I didn't say any of it. The rest of the evening passed heavy and cold. When Calder and Margot were getting ready to leave, Margot found a moment to speak to me by the front door while Calder carried Arlo, already asleep on his shoulder, out to the car. She said she was grateful for the $4,000. She said she knew that my mother and Calder had been hoping I'd change my mind. But she hadn't known my mother would say it at the table like it was already decided. "Did Calder know she was going to do that?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. Then she said goodnight and went out to the car with Opal asleep against her chest. Calder came back inside for the diaper bag and found me standing by the coat hooks in the entryway. I stepped in front of him before he could turn around. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. She told Margot and everyone at that table that I was covering the rest. "You were sitting right there." He was quiet for a moment. He set the diaper bag down on the bench. "I knew you never agreed to 18, he said. "But I was hoping you might still change your mind." I asked him if he really thought I'd hand over more money just because Mom had announced it like it was already done. "I don't know," he said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the row of coats on the hooks behind me. I just didn't want to close that door. I stood there and let the sentence sit between us. Then he picked up the diaper bag, said goodnight, and walked out to the car. Through the side light, I watched the taillights back down the driveway and turn onto the street. When they were gone, I locked the front door and went to bed. The next morning, before my father drove me to Sawyer for my flight back to Royal Oak, I sent the same message to my mother, my father, and Calder. I wrote that the $4,000 was everything I was going to lend. I would not be sending more. And from now on, no one should tell other people I had agreed to give a sum of money if I hadn't said so myself. Nobody replied that day. Nobody replied the next day either. A few days after I got back to Royal Oak, my mother called. She said Calder still had a narrow window to keep some of the original selections if I changed my mind. I told her I hadn't changed my mind. The call ended. Not long after, Calder and Margot revised the renovation plan. They paid for the electrical and plumbing work that had to be done. They kept the cabinetry that had already been ordered. They chose a less expensive countertop, scaled back the lighting and hardware, dropped the cosmetic additions, and left a few upgrades for later. The contractor continued the work. Calder didn't call me asking for more. The Sunday calls between my mother and me continued, but they were shorter now. She would ask about work, mention something happening in Marquette, then say she had to go. In one of those calls, she said something I didn't expect. "Lately, I feel like I have to be careful with everything I say to you," she said. I told her I wasn't asking her to be careful. I was only asking her not to commit my money without my permission. She said she knew that was how I saw it. Then she moved on to something else. As Christmas got closer, the calls got shorter. Early in December, on a Saturday afternoon, I went downtown to find an anniversary gift for my parents. Royal Oak Holidays was going on at Centennial Commons, and the sidewalks were busier than they usually were that time of day. Families moved past carrying paper cups and small shopping bags, and somewhere beyond the buildings live music drifted in and out above the traffic. At the end of the block, a horse-drawn wagon went by slowly, full of children in winter hats. I waited for it to clear the intersection, then continued down Washington toward Rail and Anchor. My parents were coming up on 40 years of marriage, 3 days after Christmas, and I wanted something that didn't look like a holiday present. I walked past a few shelves of home decor and stopped at a pair of wine glasses in a deep ruby-colored glass, dark enough that they wouldn't be mistaken for Christmas decoration. I picked one up and turned it under the shop light. The glass was heavier than I expected, with a thin stem and a wide bowl that caught the light in a way that made the red shift between garnet and something closer to black. I set it back next to the other and decided to take both. I chose an anniversary card from the rack near the register. The clerk wrapped the box in ivory paper and tied a length of burgundy ribbon around the lid. When I stepped back outside, the light had already started to go. The wagon was coming around again somewhere nearby. I could hear the horses. A family with 2 small children hurried past me towards Centennial Commons, one of the kids holding an open bag of cookies against his coat. I pulled the shopping bag a little closer against my side and headed home. I planned to carry the gift with me on the flight to Marquette and give it to them at the anniversary dinner. My ticket from DTW to MQT was already booked. My father was planning to drive down to Sawyer to pick me up, the same as always. In one of our calls, he'd mentioned he would keep an eye on the forecast as the date got closer. Then, in mid-December, my mother called. She said she understood I had given Calder $4,000. What she didn't understand was how I could watch my brother have to cut nearly everything he and Margot had planned for their kitchen and still keep the rest of my savings in an account for a condo I hadn't even chosen yet. She still didn't know about the corner unit I had lost. I didn't tell her. I said my savings had a purpose even without a signed contract. She said the issue wasn't just the money anymore. Since Thanksgiving, the whole family had been walking around this thing. She didn't want me to fly home and have everyone sit in the same house for days, eat Christmas dinner together, and pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. She wanted it resolved before I got there. I asked her what resolved meant. She said if I helped Calder finish the kitchen properly, at least everyone could put it down. I told her I wasn't sending more. Calder had already settled on a lower plan. The contractor was finishing the work. I asked her why she kept pushing when the decision had already been made. She said the decision had been made because I'd refused. That was the reason Calder had to choose the way he did. By then, the renovation was nearly done. The electrical was finished, the cabinets were hung, and some of what had been cut was already past the point of ordering back. She hadn't named a number this time. She didn't need to. The money had stopped being about the kitchen a long time ago. It was about whether I would choose the family over myself when the family asked me to, and the fact that I hadn't was something she couldn't put down. I understood why she still believed I might change my mind. For years, I had been the one who pushed back a little and then adjusted, took the less convenient option so things went smoother for everyone else. And in this very situation, I had told her no on a Sunday night and then sent Calder $4,000 2 days later. To my mother? That was the strongest evidence that my no was not necessarily my final answer. She had watched me give in before. She was waiting for me to give in again. She asked whether I really wanted to let this stand between me and Christmas with my own family. I told her I had answered the same question more times than I could count. She said she didn't want to spend Christmas with this still sitting between us. Can you accept my answer, Mom? I asked, because I've given you the same one every time. She didn't respond to that. The call ended a minute later. I thought about it through the rest of that day and into the next. Then I opened my booking. The round-trip holiday ticket had cost over $600. It was a non-refundable economy ticket. If I canceled before departure, the value would become an airline credit rather than cash. I canceled the flight. The next day I went downtown. Before mailing the anniversary gift, I stopped and bought Christmas presents for the children, a stuffed rabbit for Opal and a yellow toy excavator for Arlo. I packed the children's gifts in a second box and mailed everything that afternoon. That evening, I called my father and told him I wouldn't be coming home for Christmas. I wished him a Merry Christmas and a Happy Anniversary and told him the gift was on its way. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he understood and that he'd miss me. About 20 minutes after we hung up, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. Your mother and I got married on the 28th because everyone was already home for Christmas. I remember thinking it was the one week of the year when we wouldn't have to work very hard to get everybody in the same place. A second message came a minute later. I guess I've been thinking about that tonight. I understand why you're not coming. I'm not asking you to change your mind. I just wish you were going to be here. I read both messages twice. Then I wrote back, I wish I could be there too, Dad. It would be the first Christmas I had chosen not to go home. And because I wasn't going, I would also miss the dinner for my parents' 40th anniversary. In the days before Christmas, I checked flight availability from DTW a few times. The remaining options were more expensive than the ticket I'd already canceled. I closed the page. I didn't rebook. Christmas morning, my father texted that he missed me and hoped I was having a quiet day. I told him I missed him too. Calder posted a photo in the family group chat, Arlo and Opal in front of the Christmas tree. Opal holding the stuffed rabbit I'd sent her, and Arlo gripping the yellow excavator in one hand, caught mid-loft. The edge of Margot's arm was visible at the left side of the frame. I liked the photo with a heart. My mother didn't call. Christmas passed. 3 nights later, my parents' 40th anniversary dinner took place in Marquette without me. My father posted a photo of the table in the family group chat. The ruby wine glasses were in the frame, catching the light the same way they had under the shop lamp at Rail and Anchor. Behind them, wind-driven snow had turned the dark windows into a white blur. He wrote that the glasses were beautiful and that I had a good eye. I replied wishing them a happy anniversary. My mother didn't respond. My mother didn't call on the first Sunday after Christmas. The following Sunday, nothing. The Sunday after that, nothing again. I opened my message thread with her a few times. I typed a sentence or two each time, then deleted them. Calder and Margot finished the kitchen on the reduced plan. In the spring, Calder sent me $380. His message said it was the first payment and he knew it wasn't much. My father kept in touch. He called every few weeks, asked about work, sometimes sent a text about something small going on in Marquette. Once or twice, he asked whether I'd seen any new condos. In June, for my mother's birthday, I sent a card the way I always had. I called once. It went to voicemail. I left a short message wishing her a happy birthday. Margot posted a photo of the family in the group chat with a birthday message. My mother thanked everyone and tagged all of us. Calder sent a few more payments over the months. By late summer, the total was close to $2,000. There had been other listings, other showings. Nothing had worked out. My mother still hadn't called. I still hadn't bought a condo. On a Saturday morning at the end of October, I went to the Royal Oak Farmers Market the way I did most weekends when the weather allowed it. I bought eggs, apples, and a bunch of carrots. I carried the bag back to my apartment and opened the refrigerator. I had to shift a few things to one side to make room. I put the last of the groceries away, closed the refrigerator, and started my weekend. Tomorrow was Sunday. My phone sat on the counter where it always sat. I didn't know yet whether it would ring.